The crisis unfolded quietly, without warning, on a morning that had been engineered to perfection. Richard Wellington, chief executive of a global infrastructure firm, was reviewing the final negotiation schedule when a call interrupted his routine. The message was brief but devastating. The company's sole certified Russian legal translator had suffered a sudden medical emergency and would not survive surgery in time for the meeting. This was not a minor inconvenience. The Volkov Group, a powerful Russian consortium, was minutes away from arriving to finalize a multi-billion-dollar agreement involving ports, logistics corridors, and regulatory exposure across multiple jurisdictions. Months of preparation rested on precise language. A single mistranslated clause could shift liability, dissolve trust, or invite litigation on an international scale. The company had no redundancy. Postponement would signal weakness, something the Volkov delegation was known to exploit mercilessly. As executives scrambled for alternatives, phones rang unanswered across translation agencies. No replacement could arrive in time. What remained was an immaculate boardroom, an unforgiving clock, and a growing realization that control of the negotiation was slipping away before it even began. As tension escalated in the executive corridor, contingency plans collapsed one by one. Legal counsel warned against proceeding without linguistic authority, while operations executives feared the reputational damage of delay. The Volkov Group's reputation preceded them: methodical, exacting, intolerant of uncertainty. Their contracts were designed not merely to protect interests, but to dominate weaker counterparts through precision. When Richard weighed the options, each carried unacceptable risk. Entering negotiations without a qualified translator could expose the company to irreversible contractual disadvantages. Canceling at the last moment could be interpreted as instability or incompetence. In the middle of this escalating discussion, a voice emerged from the periphery, calm and unhurried. A woman stood beside a janitorial cart, holding a folded cloth, her posture steady. She identified herself simply, and stated that she could translate Russian fluently, including legal and commercial language. Her words cut through the panic, not with urgency, but with certainty. The executive turned, surprised not only by the offer, but by its source. She wore a facilities uniform. Her presence contradicted expectations, yet her confidence was unmistakable. With time evaporating and options exhausted, Richard made a decision that would alter the course of the day and the company's understanding of talent. Maria Reyes did not announce her qualifications because she had learned long ago that competence often went unnoticed when it did not arrive in the expected form. Raised in a coastal trading community, she grew up listening to technical discussions between foreign engineers and logistics coordinators. Russian contractors were frequent visitors, known for their blunt communication and intolerance for ambiguity. Maria learned to listen carefully before speaking, absorbing tone, structure, and intent. Language, she understood, was not about vocabulary alone, but about power, leverage, and clarity. Her academic path reflected that understanding. She pursued international studies, linguistics, and trade law, graduating with distinction. Professors described her as strategic, composed, and exceptionally precise. But life intervened. Her father's illness brought mounting medical bills, while visa limitations narrowed her professional options abroad. When Wellington Industries hired her for facilities work, no one asked about her education. Her uniform defined her role, and she accepted it without protest. She cleaned boardrooms where negotiations unfolded that she understood more deeply than most participants. She worked quietly, aware that preparation does not demand recognition to remain valuable. That morning, standing in the hallway, preparation met opportunity. The Volkov delegation arrived exactly on schedule. 5 men in tailored suits, their movements measured and deliberate. Their lead negotiator, Alexei Volkov, surveyed the room with a practiced glance, noting details others might miss. When Maria was introduced as the translator, his eyebrow lifted slightly, betraying skepticism without open challenge. The meeting commenced without ceremony. Discussions moved swiftly into complex territory: maritime access rights, sanctions exposure, financial guarantees, and jurisdictional responsibility. Maria translated with surgical accuracy, preserving not only words but structure and intent. She avoided unnecessary softening and resisted embellishment, understanding that credibility depended on restraint. Early in the discussion, Alexei tested her grasp of a key contractual clause, switching into dense legal phrasing. Maria responded without hesitation, explaining its function, boundaries, and implications with clarity that reassured both sides. When disagreements emerged over risk allocation, she adjusted phrasing carefully, preventing unintended assertions of authority that could have shifted leverage. At one point, an idiomatic challenge was introduced, designed to expose superficial fluency. Maria translated the meaning rather than the words, capturing intent precisely. The room grew attentive. Confidence replaced skepticism, not through performance, but through consistency. As hours passed, the negotiation deepened rather than stalled. Figures were revised, timelines recalibrated, and compliance frameworks examined under intense scrutiny. Maria maintained an almost invisible presence when appropriate, yet intervened decisively when precision demanded it. She clarified distinctions between regulatory thresholds and operational responsibilities, allowing each side to recognize alignment without losing face. When sanctions risk threatened to derail progress, she articulated legal boundaries in neutral language, preventing escalation while preserving caution. Alexei observed closely, measuring competence through outcome rather than appearance. By the final hour, the dynamic in the room had shifted. The Volkov delegation no longer pressed aggressively, recognizing equilibrium rather than vulnerability. When Alexei leaned back and described the agreement as balanced, the statement carried weight. Contracts were signed shortly afterward. As the delegation prepared to depart, Alexei handed Maria his card quietly, remarking that competence should not remain hidden. The words were not flattery, they were acknowledgment. For Maria, the moment was not vindication, but confirmation of something she had always known. Preparation reveals itself when needed. Silence does not negate substance. The following morning unfolded differently from any Maria had experienced at the company. Senior executives gathered, offering restrained but sincere recognition. Richard Wellington addressed her directly, acknowledging a failure not of process, but of perception. Talent, he admitted, had been overlooked because it did not arrive labeled or visible. That oversight would not continue. An immediate offer followed, a senior role, permanent, with authority aligned to her capability. Maria listened carefully before responding. She requested time. Her visa required renewal, and she wished to return home first. There were no negotiations, no counter-offers. Richard agreed without hesitation. For the first time, Maria exercised choice rather than necessity. When she returned to her family, the reunion was quiet and emotional. Her mother cried openly. Her father held her hands as if grounding her presence. The month that followed was not celebratory but reflective. Maria revisited memories of listening quietly, of understanding systems she was never invited to influence. She rested, not from work, but from invisibility. When she returned, it was not as a surprise savior, but as a professional whose voice carried weight because it was earned. Upon her return, Maria moved through familiar corridors with a new awareness. She passed boardrooms she once cleaned after negotiations concluded, now entering them as a participant. The transition was seamless, not because of ceremony, but because her competence required no adjustment period. Within weeks, her role expanded beyond a single negotiation. In Seoul, she navigated rapid technical discussions on automation and labor compliance, translating not just language but urgency and nuance. In Madrid, she clarified regulatory clauses before misunderstandings hardened into conflict, preventing delays that could have cost millions. In Moscow, she shifted effortlessly between English and Russian, anticipating objections before they were voiced. Executives began requesting her presence by name, not for optics, but because outcomes improved when she was involved. Maria did not immediately alter her lifestyle. Instead, she purchased a secure apartment overlooking the bay in the Philippines and gave the keys to her parents without announcement. Some achievements, she understood, did not require explanation. They required fulfillment. Her journey illustrated a truth often ignored in corporate environments. Intelligence is not diminished by silence, and preparation does not lose value when unseen. The impact of Maria's emergence extended beyond individual success. Within Wellington Industries, hiring practices were re-examined. Backgrounds were no longer assumed based on role. Internal mobility pathways were revised to allow skills to surface rather than stagnate. Executives began to question how many others possessed capabilities hidden behind uniforms, titles, or expectations. Maria did not seek to become a symbol, yet her presence reshaped conversations about visibility and value. She spoke when necessary, listened when appropriate, and declined performative praise. Her authority stemmed from precision, not volume. In negotiations, she demonstrated that language is leverage, and that mastery involves restraint as much as fluency. Partners respected her not because of novelty, but because she understood how power shifts through phrasing. The transformation was subtle but lasting. Where once meetings were dominated by those most visible, they now accommodated those most prepared. Maria's story was not framed as an exception, but as evidence of a systemic blind spot. Organizations, like individuals, often mistake familiarity for competence and overlook what does not demand attention. Correction begins when listening replaces assumption. In the months that followed, Maria's work influenced not only outcomes, but culture. Younger employees sought her mentorship, not for ambition alone, but for discipline. She emphasized preparation, clarity, and patience. Success, she explained, was not about being noticed, but about being ready when needed. Her approach challenged conventional narratives that equated assertiveness with capability. She demonstrated that silence could be strategic, that restraint could preserve power, and that understanding systems mattered more than dominating them. Outside the company, partners began recognizing her role as integral rather than auxiliary. Invitations arrived requesting her involvement early in discussions, not as a safeguard, but as an asset. Maria accepted selectively, aware that presence carries responsibility. She continued to support her family quietly, maintaining ties to the community that shaped her perspective. When asked about her journey, she avoided dramatization. Opportunity, she noted, often arrives disguised as crisis. Those who prepare without recognition are positioned to respond without hesitation. Her experience reinforced a broader lesson. Systems that fail to see their people fully do so at their own expense. The moment that began as corporate panic concluded as institutional awakening. What was nearly lost through oversight was recovered through humility. Richard Wellington reflected often on the morning when control seemed to vanish. The solution, he realized, had not been external. It had been present all along, unnoticed, because it did not conform to expectation. Maria's emergence challenged assumptions about hierarchy and merit. She did not disrupt through rebellion, but through competence. Her story circulated quietly, not as inspiration, but as instruction. Organizations depend on individuals whose preparation precedes recognition. When systems fail to acknowledge that reality, they limit their own resilience. Maria did not seek to redefine success, but she embodied a version of it grounded in substance rather than display. She remained composed, measured, and focused, aware that true authority does not require constant affirmation. In choosing when to speak and when to listen, she demonstrated mastery beyond language. Her journey served as a reminder that silence does not indicate absence, and that visibility is not a prerequisite for value. As Wellington Industries continued expanding globally, Maria's influence became structural rather than symbolic. She participated in policy revisions, advising on cross-cultural negotiation standards and linguistic risk management. Her recommendations emphasized preparation, redundancy, and respect for expertise regardless of role. The company implemented systems to identify hidden skills, encouraging employees to document capabilities beyond job descriptions. This shift did not erase hierarchy but refined it, allowing merit to surface organically. Maria remained grounded, resisting the temptation to become an emblem of exceptionality. She understood that her experience was not unique. It was simply revealed. Countless others, she believed, possessed similar depth without opportunity. Her responsibility, therefore, extended beyond personal success. It involved ensuring that systems evolved to recognize preparation wherever it existed. In doing so, she honored the years she spent learning quietly, listening carefully, and waiting without entitlement. Her authority rested not on dramatic transformation, but on continuity. She had always been capable. The world had simply caught up. The negotiation that nearly failed became a case study within the company, not for its complexity, but for its lesson. Risk, executives learned, is not limited to external threats. It includes internal blindness. Maria's contribution demonstrated that organizations often underestimate the intelligence embedded within their own structures. When titles replace inquiry, potential remains dormant. The company's renewed emphasis on listening altered recruitment, evaluation, and leadership development. Maria observed these changes with cautious optimism. Progress, she knew, required persistence. Recognition must translate into practice, not remain anecdotal. She continued to work with precision, avoiding complacency. Her presence in negotiations was no longer questioned. It was expected. Partners valued her clarity, her restraint, and her ability to maintain balance under pressure. She represented not a departure from professionalism, but its refinement. Her journey underscored a fundamental truth. Competence does not announce itself loudly. It reveals itself when stakes are highest. Beyond corporate corridors, Maria's story resonated quietly with those who recognized themselves in it. Individuals who had prepared in obscurity found affirmation without spectacle. The narrative challenged the assumption that success must be visible to be valid. Maria did not become a public figure or motivational symbol. She remained a professional whose influence was measured in outcomes rather than applause. Her life reflected intentional choice rather than reaction. She supported her family, maintained her discipline, and approached each negotiation with the same focus that had carried her through years of anonymity. The arc of her experience did not suggest that invisibility was virtuous, but that preparation was essential, regardless of recognition. When opportunity arrived, it did not require reinvention. It required readiness. Maria embodied that readiness fully. In retrospect, the moment in the hallway seemed inevitable. Crisis had merely accelerated revelation. The company's panic exposed not only vulnerability but possibility. Maria's emergence did not undermine hierarchy. It strengthened it by aligning authority with capability. The negotiation succeeded because language was treated not as formality, but as strategy. Precision preserved leverage, and restraint maintained trust. Maria's role was central not because she sought it, but because she was prepared for it. Her journey illustrated that value often resides where systems least expect it. Organizations that learn to recognize this truth gain resilience beyond contracts or capital. They gain perspective. The story concluded without spectacle, but with lasting consequence. A multinational agreement was secured, reputations preserved, and assumptions dismantled. Maria Reyes did not rise because of chance. She rose because years of quiet preparation met a moment that demanded it. Her journey affirmed that talent is not defined by title, visibility, or proximity to power. It is defined by readiness, clarity, and restraint. In stepping forward when it mattered, she revealed not only her own capability, but the limitations of systems that overlook those who do not announce themselves. The lesson endured long after the contracts were signed. Intelligence does not require permission to exist, and preparation, when finally recognized, changes everything.